Do you want to get some water?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal, and today my guest is from the great state of California. My guest was born in Los Angeles and now lives in San Francisco. His name is Ashoka Finley. Hello, Ashoka.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me on.
You're so welcome. I'm just delighted to have you here. So we are going to be talking for the next few minutes about what you're working on. I can't wait to hear all about it. But first, I'm going to go ahead and give our listeners a little bit of background about what you've done before now. Okay? Okay. Ashoka Finley is an emergent strategist, systems thinker, technologist, and facilitator who has spent his life finding answers to how humans can inhabit the earth regeneratively. This inquiry has led him to work in local food systems, cooperative renewable energy, mapping urban systems, group facilitation, and blockchain technology. His current work is as co-founder of HIFA, a social club for community and ecological well-being. I cannot wait to hear more about this. And so unless you'd like to discuss something else, let's jump right to it.
Yeah, great. Um, yeah, I'm always like, where do I begin? Because as a systems thinker, I'm always pulling in so many parts of different things. But I think where I want to start is this larger question of how do we do generational work and how do we do that work together? How do we plan for the future? How do we adapt to the now? And how do we achieve what we actually dream of? Um, I've worked in systems change for a really long time. I started in kind of an activist world and found that I often saw a lot of my peers burning out and not always achieving the desires we wanted. Like we would do these kind of high level actions that required a lot of coordination and energy, but often we were using tactics that were created from a foregone time and hadn't updated how we collaborate collectively. And so Haifa is really a attempt to create a way for everyday people to connect with others who share their values and share their vision of the future, while also being able to contribute to collective action together. And it's really about reinvigorating the power of groups to make a difference, because I think I fundamentally believe in people power. I fundamentally believe in bottom-up orientations to systems change, because I think that where systems change is in relationships. And the moment we're in right now creates a dynamic where things are really complicated. And the systems we're trying to change are really large. They're often global. If you want to change what you're eating, you have to influence several countries. Like if you want to change where your things are made, you're talking about a global supply chain. And so it's, where do we intervene? Where do we make a difference? And expecting individuals to be able to coordinate what's going to happen is too much. It's too much for an individual to really understand, like, what do I do next and what do I do now? And so our goal at Haifa is to basically create a curated set of interventions that people in our collective can take in order to kind of have the change, in order to make the change we really want to see. And so that's why we call it a social club for ecological and community well-being, because that's our focus. It's all about relationship, and it's all about connecting people to each other and themselves. And then in addition to that, being able to collectively have the impact that we desire. And so some of the ways that we connect people to each other and themselves is we have kind of events and workshops that are thematically around kind of regeneration broadly. One of the things that we've done is called the Climate Optimist Club, which is a gathering where we talk about ideas and theories and worldviews that can help people relate to this current moment of change and potentially crisis. And that has been a really kind of generative space because we like basically all media about climate change is one of despair about what the consequences are of the actions we've been having, about how long it's taking, about how much scale there is, and how there really isn't enough movement for what we need to do. And I think the reason we frame it as the Optimist Club is because we believe that change is inevitable, um, but making it what we want it to be is actually an opportunity. Like, very rarely in human history are there times where everything is so clearly up for change. Like, it's so clear that every way that we've been doing everything from, like, in the 20th century no longer works. Like, these things will not work to get us out of this crisis. And so we have a chance to change energy systems and food systems and medical systems and communities and urban systems and all of these things that will require transformation to get us out of this crisis. And we see that as an optimistic opportunity because for the first time, people are interested in public transportation in the United States as opposed to car culture or, getting rid of their lawns for native plants or creating urban gardens a la kind of like victory gardens, but for a different purpose. And there are so many of these things happening, and so many ways to intervene. It can just be hard to track what to do and where. So that's one example of kind of a workshop we hold. We're also excited about kind of doing this thing called a invasive species dinner series, which is all about throwing a dinner where we actually eat invasive species to kind of re-understand how our consumption can be used potentially for good. I think we're really outside of this frame of like shaming everybody for just kind of being human. We know that we need to eat and we know that we are going to produce waste. The question is, what is what we're eating look like, and what does that waste look like? These things are inherent processes of living systems. And so instead of trying to be like, well, you're never going to do them, how do we augment them to be positive? And so those are some of the ways that we get people into the club and meet members and have members participate. And then for the collective action side of what we do, we basically curate philanthropic donations and impact investments to organizations that are usually in frontline communities or doing on the ground work for systems transformation. We focus a lot on kind of a materiality. So it's kind of like, are you installing solar panels or doing energy efficiency work? Or are you helping farmers? Like Agrarian Trust is a great example where they help farmers create farmland commons, which give regenerative farmers access to land. We do more of those sorts of things than kind of advocacy because we think right now we're in a moment of implementation rather than convincing people that this is important. Most people know this is important. There is this really interesting Princeton study that talks about like where everyone is in this kind of delusion that nobody else wants to think about environmental issues or climate change. But the reality is that the overwhelming majority of people do, like something like 80% of millennials and almost 90% of Gen Zs care about these issues. And so it's less about you should care, you should care, you should care. It's more about what do we do about this now and how do we act together? And so, yeah, so that's kind of how we have thought about this moment. We think of it almost as what is the 21st century version of a social movement? And a lot of what we think about is like, yeah, what is a gathering place where you can meet people who share your values, your political beliefs, and how do you take action together? And so that's what we're working on at Haifa.
Well, first of all, I have to say that your presentation was flawless and seamless. What you just spoke, it was clear, it was easy to understand, it had packed with information. You're a natural.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and just knowing what you're doing doesn't automatically make someone a good speaker, or having good ideas doesn't automatically make someone a good speaker. So bravo, you're a very, very good speaker. And now that I got that out of the way,
Appreciate that.
the yeah, you should be put on a speakers bureau, speakers platform. Um, I mean, just people need to know what a good speaker you are, because you can have good ideas but not know how to talk about them. And believe me, there are a lot of people like that out there.
Yeah.
But on to your ideas, your great ideas. So I, I'm going to start with the one that excited me the most, and that was the name you gave the club, the Climate Optimist Club. That is brilliant. I immediately understood why you did that. It was to reframe the whole concept, because you're right. People, all the talk about climate change. There was a story on the Associated Press just today about how there's a chunk of a glacier that broke off of Antarctica as big as the city of New York, and it's been stuck. It's been stuck for a while, but it just got loose. And it's out there, and here it comes. But the whole article was so doomsday, had such a doomsday sound to it. So by redefining Climate Optimist Club, brilliant. And a lot of people, I mean, I want to join that club right now. That's how it made me feel.
You're
So that
invited.
so that is brilliant. And for those of you out there while working on beating the big guys in your own communities, it's relatively small but ingenious things like that that can make the difference. Here I am, I'm living in New Orleans, but I want to join a club that's in San Francisco. How about that? And I really mean it. I'm really going to sign up. So you also mentioned Ashoka, right in the beginning of your presentation. You talked about, you commented briefly about how you've seen so many people with great ideas who work so hard and burn out. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You know, why are they burning out? They had good ideas. Why did they burn out?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a couple reasons that burnout happens. One is often we're actually not very good at collaboration as a society. And I know that's kind of a bold statement, but we don't really, like, most of our structures aren't democratic structures. Like when you're in a family, that's usually kind of like a top-down thing. You have to, as your kid, you have to like listen to a parent. When you're in school, you got to listen to a teacher. When you're on a sports team, you're listening to a coach. Like, and when you're in a workplace, you obviously usually have a boss. And so we mostly have these situations where there is some kind of like upper level to intermediate. And social movements are one of the few places where we're required to be in peer relationships and resolve conflict in peer relationships without being able to appeal to some like higher authority that then will be the arbiter of what's happening. And so a lot of times I've seen just people lacking the communication skills or the um, feedback capacity or the ability to kind of resolve conflict generally um, within movement, and those things start to create like really large frictions, right? They start to wear down trust, and then all of a sudden you end up with kind of siloing within the movement and the groups where the affinity groups are kind of saying, oh, that person over there and that group over there doesn't understand, they're like not for the cause, and yada yada yada. And so you end up with a bunch of friction that I think breaks, like relational friction that I think starts to break down people's capacity to act. um I think also it's just hard, right? We're trying to change systems that have decades of momentum, along with like not only kind of institutional learnings or institutional momentums, but also cultural momentums where people are saying, hey, I've done it this way for blah, blah, blah years. My grandpappy was a coal miner, his grandpappy was a coal miner, and we're coal miners. So why are we going to change? So that kind of like intractable amount of historical weight, I think, often contributes. And then obviously, like in social movements, we have to think about the pressure that's kind of applied against people by the powerful, right? Like you have like policing tactics and surveillance tactics and economic pressure applied. Obviously, being an activist isn't a good paying job generally. Far more money being in the king's court than being outside the court and being like the king is corrupt. And so the rewards for activism are so low, and we live obviously in a capitalist system that is often creating extractive dynamics that require people to pay more and more money just to survive and live. And so I think the combination of these things make social change in the kind of historical example really hard. And so I think like for us, that's why we really prioritize that it's more relational than anything. If we don't have good relationships at the center of our movement and the center of what we're trying to do, then the outcomes we achieve won't be the ones we want. And so if we can, yeah, if we can prioritize those, like I was thinking about this, and this is something that kind of inspired me in my process of starting Haifa was if we're I have very rarely been to a march with thousands of people where at some point when we got to the speaker stage, where those speakers were like, hey, form up in groups of 5 and meet the people that you've been walking next to, because this movement is only as strong as the people and the relationships in it, right? Like we always stop there and listen to the person that we know we agree with, which is why we're at the march, and we do the like rah thing, and then we walk away, we disperse, and none of those bonds are be able to really be built on. And so I think we really got to rethink the way that we're orienting to what does organizing and activism mean, and what is the goal of it at this point. Because I think that we are turning the outcomes into the means, and I think that the like means are actually different, or I think the means are different, and then that's how we get to the outcomes.
Absolutely. I so agree with everything you're saying. I'm going to add one thing, a personal experience of mine, and then I'm going to
Yeah,
give
of
it back
course.
to you. So when I was forming a coalition of people to beat the big guys, it took a while, but eventually it got quite large. It got to thousands, eventually 25,000 people. So the moment it starts to get recognized, oh, Ms. Rosenthal, she with a click of a mouse can rally 25,000 people to write a letter and make a phone call. What happens, and here we are, we're a nonprofit. What happens is a lot of people will see me and try to contact me and convince me that I should run my organization the way they want me to, or they want me to take on an additional cause, in addition to what we're already working on. And it happens to this day. It happened to this day. And as long as you recognize it, and you can just be very polite and say that's a very noble cause. It's not what we're doing, but it is a noble cause, and offer some way to provide a little advice. But it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
and you out there needs to recognize that there will be people that will try to make their cause yours, and just you'll recognize it when it happens. But yeah, and those things can cause burnout. So,
Yeah, definitely.
I really thank you. Your suggestions on how to avoid that were excellent. I wanted to talk a little bit more about a very valid point you made, that when you're up against the big guys and you're trying to make a change, you're often, not always, but often working against a conglomerate and that might even be global. Not always, but it
Yeah.
might be. Okay. And
Right.
so can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that can be rather daunting
Mm.
to even to you
Yeah.
and even to me. And I'm pretty tough. So
Hmm.
what would you so what would you what can you share with our listeners when the big guys is actually it's a big organization or a conglomerate or maybe
The
even
big.
global?
Yeah. I think what I'll say there is that a a corporation or conglomerate's power is derived from our society's dependence on them. And so, like, BP has power because people keep going to Arco, right? And Shell has power for the same reason. And you end up with these um, dynamics where I'm like, I don't want to eat wheat that's been sprayed with glyphosate. And in order to do that, then I probably can't buy Nestle products, right? And so Nestle also has power because of the ways that we participate and interact with them. And so I think what we really have to think about when dealing with conglomerates and these large corporations is in which ways am I dependent on them? Is my community dependent on them? And is our society dependent on them? And find ways to intervene to create new dependencies because a dependency is just a relationship, right? The reason that these conglomerates are power is because we're in relationship with them. And the less that we are in relationship with them, the less power they have in our lives. And so I think a lot about that's why we focus so much on logistics at Haifa and so much on like infrastructure stuff because I know you can relate to infrastructure stuff because infrastructure really like creates the conditions under which people are living, right? And so if all of the people in my community don't have their own energy systems, they're kind of at the whim of the utility. And what we have to do is convince the utility to make a different choice in its energy buying. And that's all like this whole thing. Or we can change the way that we're generating energy in our community. And so I think a lot about kind of Buckminster Fuller in this kind of idea where it's all about building new, like build the new system that you want to replace the old system. And that's not to say that we don't continue to advocate for changes to the old system. I really love Joanna Macy's framework around this, where she calls it block, build, and be, where block is stopping the actions that you no longer want to happen. Be or build is creating the new reality and new systems that you want to use in the future. And then B is like the presence and inhabiting of that new future as we walk along the path.
Block,
And so I
build,
think that Block Build B, yeah, Joanna Macy is amazing. Um, and so I really like that as a framework because if I only think about block, if I only think about how am I going to change the outlook of these kind of essentially like artificial intelligences that really only have one thing in mind, which is usually profit, it becomes really daunting. It's really hard to think about changing their ways of being. And so I think for me it's balancing it with what am I trying to stop and what am I trying to create and what am I trying to bring forward.
exactly. And the only thing I can add is it's not personal. It's an organization.
Yeah.
It's not personal. And
Yeah.
you can make bold statements and make valid points and use rather harsh language, but it's not personal. It's not personal.
Yeah.
You're not talking about your next door neighbor, their dog. So that's one of the things that you can take heart from when it's a conglomerate. Another thing is these big conglomerates, because they're big, they can make big mistakes. And all we have to
Yes.
do is be on the watch, be on the lookout. And when we see one of them making these big mistakes, take advantage of it. And because one of the things that in line with that, the other side of that coin, when they make their big mistakes, they're petrified of anything happening to their reputation, their goodwill, their PR.
Totally. Yeah.
petrified. Because it all boiled
I
down to
mean,
what you
consumers
said.
are so
It-
much more conscious now.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
relationship with their consumers. That's what it's all boiled down to. So it's
exactly.
imminently, so as daunting as it may seem, these organizations are imminently beatable, and it's going on somewhere every day, every day.
Yeah,
So, is
yeah.
there anything else you'd like to add? We've about run out of time. Is there anything you'd like to add for our listeners, Ashoka?
Um, yeah, I could just say that if you want to learn more about Haifa, you can look it up at haifa.network. We're called Haifa. Some of you, the kind of botanist, fungal nerds out there probably recognize it, but what Haifa is, it's plural is hyphae, but they are the branching kind of parts of a mycelium. And so we think about ourselves much like that, where we're kind of this network of people who care that are sharing information and resources across the landscape and are completely necessary to how kind of a forest obviously communicates and lives and thrives. And we want to be kind of that underlying glue and resource for the regeneration movement and the movement for kind of justice in society.
Well, I personally feel a lot better having had this conversation. And I'm definitely going to go out and I'm going to sign up for that club. And also, I want to tell you about we eat invasive species here in New Orleans, in the Louisiana. We are eating
Nutria.
nutria who are destroying
Yeah.
the
I
levees.
have Nutria hats.
You do.
I wanted to make hats, and so I found a supplier because I didn't realize the reason Nutria exists is because of the fur farms
Because of the
back in the
fur.
day
Mhm.
for the fur. And so there are people who make hats out of Nutria fur because it's actually really good quality fur and deals with the problem of invasive species in Louisiana.
It's also delicious with gravy and rice. I know.
Yes, I heard it's like carnitas.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find, maybe we can talk about this later, but I would love to find a supplier for Nutria so
Mhm.
that I can get more people aware of it.
I'll help you with that. I'm hooked
Okay,
in, so I
great.
can help you with that. So thank you so much for joining me, Ashoka. And thanks
Thanks,
to
Sandy.
all of you, the
Appreciate it.
listeners, for joining us today. We hope that you like this episode. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, so stay with me.